A repaving crew is back on the same half-mile of interstate for the third time this year. The asphalt is 18 months old, already cracking into a web of black scars, and a county truck sits on the shoulder with cones fanning out behind it like this is routine. Because it is. 4,000 miles away, a German autobahn poured in the 1980s carries heavier trucks than US law allows, and it is still smooth. European highways are built to last 40 years. American roads are designed to last about half that by design, not by accident. This is not bad weather. It is not bad drivers. It is not about asphalt. So what is it? The answer is not in a chemistry lab. It is in a contract signed before a single truck touched the road, and in a funding formula nobody driving over that pothole has ever seen. This isn't one unlucky stretch of highway. It's the national condition. The American Society of Civil Engineers puts the country's surface transportation needs between 2024 and 2033 at roughly $3.5 trillion. 2.2 trillion of that for roads alone. Even using the historic funding boost from the 2021 infrastructure law as the new baseline, the roadway system is still short $684 billion over the next decade. That's not a pothole problem. That's a structural deficit, measured in the trillions, repeating every budget cycle. And it isn't an accident of bad engineering. The Federal Highway Administration's own guidance says American pavements are typically designed for a 20-year service life. Only some states stretch that target to 30. Compare that to a country that designs for 30 and gets 40 to 50 anyway, and the gap stops looking like rounding error. In 1993, Michigan's Department of Transportation ran an experiment that should have changed everything. Engineers rebuilt a stretch of concrete highway 2 different ways, side by side, on the same corridor, under the same traffic and the same Midwestern winters. One section used standard American methods. The other copied German specifications. 2 layers of concrete instead of 1, a gravel base instead of sand, tighter joint spacing between slabs, same weather, same trucks, same state. The German spec section outlasted the standard build, not by a little, by design. Here's the explanation most people already believe walking into this. America's roads fail because of brutal freeze-thaw winters, scorching summers, and trucks too heavy for the pavement underneath them. It sounds reasonable. It is also incomplete. European highways carry heavier truckloads than American interstates do, under stricter axle weight rules, and Scandinavian winters are no gentler than Michigan's, no easier on pavement than anything Minnesota or Maine deals with every January. The climate excuse and the truck weight excuse don't hold up once you put them next to a country that deals with the exact same conditions and still builds roads that last twice as long. So look underneath the surface, literally. German roadbeds typically run 5 to 6 feet deep, roughly double the American average. That depth isn't decoration. It's what lets the road resist frost heave and drain water away before it can freeze, expand, and crack the layers above it. European engineers spend disproportionately more time and money designing for exactly the 2 failure modes Americans blame on the weather: frost and standing water. In 2006, a joint scan team from the Federal Highway Administration, AASHTO, and the Transportation Research Board's own research program toured concrete pavement practices in Germany, Austria, Belgium, and the Netherlands. What they found wasn't a secret formula. It was a different default. In every country visited, concrete pavement was treated as synonymous with long-life pavement. There was no separate premium category for durable construction, because durability was simply the standard. Pavements built to a 30-year design life, they were routinely expected to perform for 40 to 50. American pavements, by contrast, are built to a structural design equation that traces back to a single accelerated road test the federal government ran in 1958 and 1960. 2 years of controlled truck traffic standing in, mathematically, for 2 decades of real-world wear. Roughly 80% of state transportation departments still design around that equation today. The weather isn't the cause. The weather is just the trigger pulling on a structure that was never built deep enough or specified long enough to resist it. None of this is a materials mystery. American engineers know how to build a 6-foot roadbed. Nothing about it requires technology the United States lacks. The same FHWA scan team that toured Europe came home recommending 2-lift construction and the kind of intelligent compaction technology already standard on German job sites. Asphalt is cheap, fast to lay, and easy to patch, which is exactly why it dominates American roads, while concrete, durable but expensive up front, gets reserved for the busiest corridors. That's a design choice, not a limitation of engineering knowledge. The textbook answer has existed for decades, written down in the agency's own scan reports, gathering dust in a federal archive. So why does the standard actually poured into the ground stay so much thinner? Thomas Dean spent years trying to get Washington to answer that question. As executive director of the Transportation Research Board, Dean watched federal investment in highway research stay flat while the system above it kept aging year after year, mile after mile. His comparison became infamous in transportation circles. For years, he pointed out, the Department of Agriculture spent more researching dog food than the Department of Transportation spent researching the roads tens of millions of people drive on every single day. It wasn't a joke. It was a measurement of priorities, and it explains why a known fix sitting in a federal scan report, written in plain English, can go a decade without ever reaching a state contract. Outside Washington, the cost of that priority lands somewhere much smaller and much more personal, in alignments knocked out of true, in tires that wear unevenly, in a county public works supervisor who repaves the same corridor every single budget cycle because the funding never stretches far enough to do it right the first time. That supervisor isn't incompetent. They're operating inside a structure that was never built to reward durability. Every spring, the same crew patches the same stretch with the same thin asphalt overlay, because a full rebuild to the deeper, German-style standard would blow through a budget set by a tax that hasn't moved since 1993. The damage isn't random, and it isn't rare. It's recurring, a quiet tax paid in time, money, and worn-out parts by people who never voted on a single highway contract. The person standing closest to the pothole didn't design the system that put it there. So who did? Pull back the layer of weather and the layer of materials, and what's left underneath both is a payment structure. Across the country, state and local governments have a long-standing habit of awarding road contracts to the lowest bidder, and the lowest bid routinely buys the cheapest materials and the fastest, least durable work. It's not corruption in the dramatic sense. It's a procurement rule that treats upfront price as the only number that matters, while the actual lifespan of the road gets left out of the bidding sheet entirely. American contracting procedures actively discourage the kind of innovative techniques European contractors use because novelty costs more today and pays off in a decade. Nobody bidding on the contract will be around to take credit for. A contractor who wins by underbidding has no contractual reason to build past the design life on the page, and the agency awarding the contract has no budget line that rewards them for trying. Underneath that procurement habit sits something even older, the Highway Trust Fund, created by the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 to build the interstate system, and funded ever since by a flat per gallon gas tax. There's a bitter irony buried in that origin story. President Eisenhower pushed the interstate system into existence, partly because he had seen the German Autobahn firsthand during World War II and wanted America to have a network just as capable. He got the network. He didn't get the standard underneath it. The 1956 Act built the roads on the Autobahn's inspiration and on the Treasury's economics, a flat motor fuel tax dedicated to a trust fund designed to let the system pay for itself as the country drove. That financing model hasn't fundamentally changed in 70 years. The tax itself hasn't been raised since 1993. Because it was never indexed to inflation, it has lost more than half its purchasing power since then, buying barely a fraction of the construction it once could. While material and labor costs have climbed for 30 straight years, America imported the Autobahn's image. It never imported the Autobahn's funding discipline or its design life standard. Put those two pieces together, and the contrast with Europe sharpens into focus. European governments typically write contracts that specify how long a road must last under defined conditions, then leave the engineering method up to the contractor. The American system does the opposite. It specifies the price and lets the lifespan fall out wherever it lands. Contractors who win on cheap bids profit from the repeat repair cycle that follows. Agencies under-resourced by a frozen tax keep choosing the lowest number because it's the only number their budget allows. And the politicians who could raise or index that gas tax have had 30 years to do it and haven't. It isn't the weather, it isn't the trucks. It's a funding and procurement structure that was quietly engineered, decade after decade, to reward cheap now over durable later. This isn't a new discovery. In 1992, Time magazine published an investigation called "Why America Has So Many Potholes," and it already named both problems: the lowest bid contracting habit and the chronic underinvestment in highway research, more than 3 decades before this video. 2 years earlier, in 1990, a delegation of American civil and government transportation experts toured European highways and came back stunned, watching maintenance crews work on roads that, by American standards, already looked flawless. The 2006 FHWA, AASHTO, and TRB scan team came back with the same conclusion 16 years later and recommended the same fixes: deeper roadbeds, 2-lift concrete construction, intelligent compaction. The pattern repeats on a loop of its own. A delegation travels to Germany. The gap gets documented in an official federal report, recommendations get filed, and the underlying procurement rule and the frozen tax that funds it survive untouched every single time. The warnings didn't stop there. In 2017, the American Society of Civil Engineers issued its infrastructure report card and gave the nation's roads a grade of D, explicitly warning that continued underinvestment in the Highway Trust Fund would keep degrading the system. The same D-range grade roads had already been receiving in report card cycles before it, a grade that doesn't move because the underlying mechanism generating it doesn't move either. Congress's response, repeatedly, has not been to fix the fund's structure. It's been to patch it. Since 2008, lawmakers have transferred roughly $275 billion in general fund money to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent, including $118 billion folded into the 2021 infrastructure law. That's not a fix. That's 30 years of bailing out a fund whose core mechanism, a gas tax frozen since 1993, Congress has simply chosen not to touch. Then, in 2021, came the moment that looked like the turning point. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act delivered nearly a 50% increase in federal highway funding over the previous transportation law, and construction work started on 207,000 miles of American roadway. For a moment, it looked like the system was finally getting what decades of scan reports and report cards said it needed. Here's the contradiction that money didn't touch. The law poured more dollars into the same pipeline: lowest bid contracting, a 20-year design standard built from a 2-year road test, a procurement culture that still doesn't price in durability. None of that changed, and the foundation underneath the new money is already cracking again. The Congressional Budget Office projects the Highway Trust Fund's highway account balance, could approach zero by fiscal year 2028, with the mass transit account hitting the same wall the same year. The gas tax base it depends on keeps shrinking as vehicles become more fuel efficient and electric cars pay nothing into it at all. Since 2008, Congress has already transferred roughly $275 billion from the general fund just to keep the trust fund solvent through previous shortfalls, including the $118 billion folded into the 2021 law itself, meaning a chunk of the historic infrastructure investment wasn't new money for new durability at all. It was a bailout wearing the costume of an upgrade. The 2021 law didn't replace a broken funding mechanism. It refilled it temporarily on the same expiring clock, while leaving the contracting incentive that produces short-lived roads completely untouched. The biggest highway investment in a generation didn't solve the problem. It bought the same problem a few more years, on the same fragile schedule, headed toward the same cliff. So go back to that half mile of cracked interstate, 18 months old, with the crew and the cones parked on the shoulder again. It isn't a flaw in the asphalt. It's the physical signature of a tax frozen since 1993, a funding law written in 1956, a design equation built on a road test from 1958, and a bidding process that has never once been forced to price in how long a road actually needs to survive. America didn't fail to learn how to build roads that last 40 years. Its own federal scan teams came home from Germany and wrote down exactly how, in government reports sitting in agency archives right now. The country that inspired the interstate system with the Autobahn never built the funding system the Autobahn runs on. What America built instead was a financial and procurement structure that was never asked to deliver that lifespan in the first place. And every time that structure ran short, the response was another transfer, another patch, another 5-year bill, never a redesign. That crew on the shoulder will be back again next year, on the same half mile, doing the same patch, paid for by the same frozen tax. The potholes aren't an accident of geography. They're an invoice for a choice made decades ago and never revisited.